In Scandinavian folklore, mylings are believed to be ghostly incarnations of souls of children that were unwanted and killed by mothers. In countless stories, people claim that a myling will haunt the location in which they perished and can be heard crying in the night. They'll target lone wanderers and demand to be carried. They are believed to be menacing, enraged and revenge-seeking entities. Apparently, a myling can be put to rest if you give it a name or find its corpse and bury it in holy ground. Here's 3 stories of alleged encounters. By Reddit user Redsan. So this happened around 10 years back. I was 12 years old. I still remember the horrified face of my father, all glistening in sweat, and his eyes, I remember them vividly. His eyes seemed to have witnessed absolute horror. He looked like he has been to hell and back. This is the only memory I have of that night. It was very late when he returned home in that condition. We kids were told to go upstairs, and the backstory wasn't revealed to us until very recently. So I'm going to share that story with you now. We were on holiday at our country house. There is some kind of a festival fair happening every summer in the nearby town. My father spent most of his youth in this house, so he has got a lot of childhood friends nearby. They used to roam together on bicycles in and around the countryside. That night they went to the fair market, and by the time they started back home, it was already late. The friends drifted away to their homes, and my father was cycling back alone. There is a small canal that he had to cross over an old wooden beam bridge. It was a particularly wiggly one, and he dismounted to cross it on foot. As he did so, he heard a baby crying at the far end of the bridge. He hurried across the bridge, and when he was at the middle, he could make out a baby lying on one of the last planks. He was kind of flabbergasted, but decided to take a closer look. There was no basket or anything. Just an old blanket on which the baby was lying. It immediately stopped crying upon seeing my father. He thought the better of it and decided he would just carry it back to our house. He took the baby on one hand and laid its head carefully on his shoulder. He embraced it closer to his chest before mounting the bicycle again. He was now paddling slowly and could feel a warm dampness on his shoulder. The logical explanation in his mind was that the baby was simply drooling. About a quarter mile from our house, my father felt a little strained to carry the baby, and as nonsensical as it sounds, he felt as though the baby has grown heavier than when he picked it up. He took his eyes off the road and looked at it. To his utter amazement, he noticed that the limbs of the baby, especially the legs, had grown larger and slender. He halted to a stop in shock and tried to pull the baby off his chest with both of his arms to have a proper look. Now this part of my father's account becomes disturbing. It appeared that the baby's skin had somehow turned wrinkly and dull. But the most horrific part was its face. He seemed to have seen something beyond his ability to describe to this day. He just recollects that what he was holding in his hands was something ancient and evil. What happened next is a blur to him. He might have thrown the thing away, or the thing would have wriggled itself away from his hands. He doesn't remember. The next thing he remembers is somehow reaching his home scared to his bones. I'm posting this on behalf of my father, who really wants a closure of what sort of a being he encountered that night. It'll be a great help if anyone could bear insight. By anonymous 4chan user. My grandfather grew up on a farm a few miles from the nearest town, the one I live in to this day. The town had a brothel during the late 1950s, and my grandfather would often ride his horse into town to visit the brothel and only return late at night. One night he was on this way home when he heard crying coming from a little ways off the trail. He got off his horse to investigate and saw a baby alone, swaddled and just bawling on the ground. My grandfather was confused as it was both in the middle of the night and in the middle of nowhere. So, he picked up the baby with the intention of taking it back to town. He was cradling the baby while they rode back, and the baby had also stopped crying and seemingly fell asleep. When my grandfather was nearing town, he suddenly heard deep laughter and realized the cackling was coming from the baby. When he looked down, the baby was staring right up at him with a sinister grin. It had a full set of long and very sharp teeth. Terrified, my grandfather flung the thing away and galloped home. He stuck to his story, completely confident in the authenticity of it, despite a lot of mocking from the family. By Reddit user 9fingered bandit 96, I was born in the USA, but used to visit Mexico often pre-COVID. Probably twice a year as a kid and once a year when I started living on my own. This was my first experience when I went. I was around 9. If you're not aware, some places in Mexico are enchanted or plain haunted. I was staying with my uncle at the time in the country. Country meaning a lot of houses do not have electricity and the nights can get pitch black. Even though my life was padded in the US, it was still neat to see how my uncle lived. My mom and siblings came, but I chose to stay with my uncles that time because I was close to them. They owned a farm that was in the middle of nowhere. They had electricity, but would try not to use it. They had a barn and a huge cornfield. I remember this day like it was yesterday. I helped my uncle to do chores around the farm. Feed the animals, mainly while he did the heavier work. We went inside before sundown, ate and went to bed. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and checking my wristwatch. It was almost 3 a.m. I don't know what woke me up, but I looked around and saw a quick shadow figure in the room by the window, looking out. Now I'm shitting bricks, and I quietly call out to my uncle. We were sleeping in the same room. He quickly shushed. I stopped talking, and it went eerily quiet, not a bug or bird making a noise. That's when I heard it. It sounded like a baby crying, but it sounded very far away. It gave me chills. He went to get his brother, my other uncle. He told me to come on and grabbed his shotgun and his dog. Told me to hold a flashlight and to hold his dog's leash, and we went outside to see where the crying was coming from. We waited and we heard the crying coming from the cornfield. I looked at my uncles and they both looked scared. They decided to go investigate and brought me along. I was terrified the farther we went into that cornfield. They originally thought it was a fox or coyote, but they said they know what they sound like, and they said this sounded like a human child. Now we were hearing the crying constantly. Every time we went farther in, the crying would sound more distant. This field was huge, so we were maybe a quarter mile in, and my older uncle said he felt something in his gut tell him that something was wrong and that we needed to get out of there immediately. He said to run with the dog, and the dog will lead me home, but to shine the flashlight behind me so they could follow. As soon as I took off running, the crying got super loud and sounded so close. I ran, and I reached the farm pretty fast. My uncles did too, and we got inside and boarded up the house. They stayed up till sunrise. I asked them what that was. And my older uncle just stammered and said he didn't know, but something was trying to lure us in there.